So we good to go?
Yep, over to you.
Okay, great. So we've got regrets from Ryan Painter, Trustee Ryan Painter and Trustee Diane McNally. And I think we can't really approve motions, but we, and if I could get you to agree to the, let me start by acknowledging the traditional territory. So the Greater Victoria School District wishes to recognize and acknowledge the Esquimalt and Songhees nations on whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we do our work. And we certainly value our commitment to the local nations. So, Anne, I think we can tentatively approve this agenda and move on. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's go through the agenda. We just won't be making any decisions this evening, but I think there's a lot of really good information for the public here and an opportunity for questions. So yeah, I'm going to try and see if the other laptop works. So I might pop up twice.
Okay, so yeah, and hopefully Trustee Waters will come along as well. So
yeah.
Okay, so I think I'll skip the minutes, Anne, just because we can't approve them anyway.
That's all right. And
we'll go to C1, which is a motion by Trustee Painter, but Trustee Painter is not with us.
And I did have a conversation with Trustee Painter, and so let's table that till October.
Okay, great. And so we go to C2, Parent Education Fund, and to you, Superintendent Whitten.
Thank you, Trustee Ferris. So C2, Parent Education, is an update. It's a memo that is provided every year at this time. It speaks to the opportunity for PACs to apply for funding to do educational opportunities with PACs or work in collaboration with other PACs throughout the school. So I point to page 6 of the packet. The memo also shows which schools applied last year and received funding. And as we move forward for this year, information will be sent out tomorrow. And then we'll take those applications, and we have $7,000 again to support PACs as they move forward with opportunities of learning.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Deb. Are there any questions about that? All right, so I think we'll just move right on.
I think that Angela actually has a question.
Oh, is that right? Okay, yes. Angela, please.
Hi, thank you. We at BC PAC were hoping to get some clarity on Zoom licensing again for this year. We feel that it's probably in the best interest of safety that we do not meet as a group. And I know that the Minister of Education stopped funding Zoom licenses effective June 30th of the last school year. So we're just wondering how we can move forward with that. Is that something that should come out of our own budget? We're going to have to be talking to parents about that who do want to continue to meet this year. And it is our opinion that it's safer to continue a virtual platform here. So I'm just wondering if any of that money can be used towards our Zoom licenses, or if we have any kind of way forward with that.
So I can invite Andy to speak a little bit about the Zoom licenses and what's changed from last year to this year. And then we have had conversations with principals and vice principals around their access to a Zoom license, which may be different than the other license. So I'll let Andy speak, and then we can answer other questions.
That's great. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Evening, everybody. You're correct. The funding, provincial funding for Zoom licensing ended. We did not have budget to, in fact, the ITL department had to cut in a number of areas, and there was not the budget to license the full staff across the organization. What we did do was reallocate a budget line, a much smaller budget line, to key areas where Zoom licensing was required. So people running Pro-D events, running staff meetings. So there's a number of criteria. Unfortunately, that is as far as we've stretched it to this point. But we understand that the demand is far higher than the licensing we currently have. But it's really a budgetary issue currently. The licensing that all staff do have access to is still FIPA compliant. It's still the Canadian education licensing, and it's restricted to up to 40 minutes meetings and up to 100 people. So we are finding most scenarios will fit that need. But obviously, there's some scenarios where that requires the meeting to end and then a new meeting to be started to use that standard license.
Right. So what kind of money are we talking about here?
I would have to follow up because it's done in tiers through the provincial licensing agreement. So it depends on the amount that we would be licensing in full. And I wouldn't want to give an inaccurate quote right now because I just want to make sure I had the right number.
Yes, yeah, I was just wondering if we could use any of the parent education fund for licensing, since it's a need by parent groups, and we don't want parent groups to have to pay for it necessarily. What do you, any ideas, Deb?
I think I could also invite Kim, Secretary Treasurer Morris, if she has any thoughts on this. I think as has been mentioned across last year, one of the learnings we had for Zoom was the accessibility for parents and other groups to be able to use it. And so I think we have recognized the importance of it. The financial piece that I would refer to Secretary Treasurer Morris.
And I too, off the top of my head, don't know what the incremental cost is of increasing that licensing, similar to what we had last year. And in terms of the PAC monies or the fund, I believe that PACs could probably make a case for it being used as Pro-D platform. So I don't see an issue there, in my opinion, but we would have to bring back the incremental cost. I'm sorry, I don't know that off the top of my head tonight.
Okay, well, that's great. Do we have any further questions about this?
May I just add a point there, please? Because we're talking PAC use of Zoom, I believe last year this was funded through a different organization. And I'm not sure whether our education license actually covers PAC members. So that's something we would need to follow up on as well, because it's for staff. Originally was the terms of the education licensing. So it's just something we'd need to look into as well.
Oh, okay, great. So we'll await further updates and perhaps get something at the board meeting to answer your questions, Angela. I'd like us to go back to the beginning here, and since we have Trustee Waters with us now, welcome Trustee Waters, and we could approve the agenda. So Trustee Waters, if you could put forward a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, and I don't see any additions or deletions, so all those who approve. And Ann Whitaker, oh, good, you're there. That's great. Okay, thank you both. And the agenda approval of the minutes, if I could go to that, could one of you move the approval?
So moved.
Thank you, and all those in favor? Thank you. So now we're back to C3, COVID update, Superintendent Whitten.
Thank you. So as you can see in the memo, it is just outlining what we've done to date with regards to our communicable disease prevention plan, as well as the different venues that we've met with and spoken with on the plan. It's evolving, it's responsive, and it's we seem to have sometimes questions that come forward that we look to answers for and then come back and feed that back out to the system. So we have had lots of meetings to discuss it. We have the communicable disease prevention plan in place. We know that we will be having vaccination clinics in 5 of our secondary schools. And we are currently working with Island Health and will continue to work with Island Health whenever there is an exposure and a notification process that goes with them. As with all of these, we follow public health orders and the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education guidelines. So I'm not sure if there are specific questions, but the memo is fairly straightforward in what we've done to date.
So I'm thinking that the information is available on our website. Is that correct? Yes. So if people had questions, they could go to the website and look at the documents. Does anybody have questions about it this evening that they? Okay, we'll see.
There is a
Yes.
question in the chat.
Pardon?
There is a question in the chat and it says, will
Oh.
contact tracing be done when there is an exposure, i.e. will parents be informed as if there is a case of exposure in the school?
Okay, right.
Sorry.
So yes, contact tracing is continuing as it has last year. One change that has been made is with regards to general notifications. So when there is an exposure, the individuals who need to know the information, the teaching staff, TP staff, and students who are impacted and need to either self-monitor or self-isolate will receive a letter. What is different again is that the general notification that went out last year to the entire school population will not be sent out.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? I don't see anything else in chat. Shall we move along to the framework for enhancing student learning?
I'll get this going. So there's a memo attached to that as well, and it speaks to the ministry in 2020 provided the framework for enhancing student learning and the requirement that we submit or the board submits this report by September 30th of every year. This is a continuous improvement report. We may have been familiar with past reports around superintendent's achievement contract. This one is similar to that. I would like to, though, speak to some of the differences. One is that this, for us in this district, this framework for enhancing student learning has been very collaborative. It has been built off of our strategic plan. So information in the framework, which you have seen in the pack-up, is not hopefully not new to the readers and to the stakeholders and partners and rights holders. These conversations happened as the strategic plan was developed. And the framework is trying to, on a very high level, identify the goals and strategies that we will use this year, including the data that we use to make our decisions and the resources and supports that go along with the goals and strategies. We do know from the ministry that the length of the document is supposed to be 10 pages. And so, as you can imagine, when you write a report, it's pretty hard to get everything into a 10-page report and speak to all of the fantastic work that happens in the district. I think that this framework has been done exceptionally well, and we're very proud of the work as we move forward. And again, this is a cyclical and continuous piece. So this is our first vessel document. It won't be our last, but it does speak to the work that is occurring. I'll start just with goals 1, 2, and 3. again, align with the district strategic plan. So when you look at the framework, you will see embedded in the FESL document are goals of the strategic plan as well as strategies. So the first goal area is, as we know, our goal 1 of the strategic plan in creating an inclusive and culturally responsive learning environment that will support and improve all learners' personal and academic success. And we realized that this goal had 3 identifiable areas that we would pay more or close attention to, and those are written out on page 24 of our pack up. As we go through the FESL, Tammy will start just by going over the goal 1 areas. And then as we look at how this framework comes to life in our schools and in learning opportunities for both adults and students, and also improves the student learning experience for all students K through 12. We'll then move to goal 2 area where Colin will give an introduction, and Shelley, Dr. Nimi will speak to the goal 2 area, and then goal 3, Harold will intro that area, and Pam will speak more in depth about the work that we're doing around mental health and physical well-being. So I will pass it over to Tammy to lead us through that first area.
Thanks, everyone, and good evening. I just would like to acknowledge Sean Powell and David Hovis, who were collaborators on this part of the plan, and also acknowledge how rewarding it was to work on it collaboratively, because we realize there's a lot of overlap as you go through it. All of this work touches other parts of the work. So in some ways, the challenge was the opportunity because it helped us see how all pieces are connected. So the first part really focuses on our continued focus for developing culturally responsive learning environments where all students are connected to their learning and feel seen, heard, and valued. We know that focusing on philosophy and pedagogy and being explicit about the classroom application that will be able to increase student connection, engagement, and belonging. One example of how we'll action this work is through sharing the recently developed culturally responsive assessment principles. Student learning survey data and MDI data has shown that students don't always know what's expected of them in order to be successful. And so using First Peoples principles of learning as a foundation, we work collaboratively to develop draft principles to go out to the system. Collaboration included members of the district team, including the Indigenous Education Department, principals and vice principals. We shared a draft with JCCI and through some teachers and professional development opportunities. And additionally, we enlisted the help of some of our critical friends who we are working with in the district to support moving assessment forward. So the principles will be shared in draft this year and continue to be revised as appropriate throughout the year. The intention is to hold children at the center of the work. They are research-based and intend to be holistic in nature. And we know that there's a deep connection between student success and effective assessment. I'm happy to send the full document so that you can see it, or come back to another meeting to talk about the process, the research videos, the draft document, and how this is going to move out further in a future meeting. As a team, we continue to focus on literacy and numeracy K to 12. The document reflects the critical piece around literacy and numeracy in terms of that transfer to success after high school. As you can see in the strategy section, ongoing targeted quality professional development will continue to allow multiple entry points for educators. The development of local literacy and numeracy assessment in grades 3, 6, and 9 will allow for additional information about areas of focus. We have set provincial assessments as a target for measuring success. Currently, you'll notice that we are under the provincial areas in a couple of areas that we indicated, and the goal is to close that gap. In some cases, 2 years, and others 1 year. A focus on the early years continues to be essential. Targeted resources and supports will enhance programming already in place, as well as support the creation of baseline data for further focus, interventions, and strategies to support student success. Additional funding and opportunities to collaborate will be allocated to schools who do not have the early literacy collaboration teachers. Based on the data from the Early Development Instrument, often referred to as EDI, additional ECE hours were added to some schools in order to support transition and early learning. Strong Start centers with ECEs were also provided additional hours to work with kindergarten classrooms each afternoon. We know that connection and belonging are foundational for student success, and we really appreciate Shelley Nemi's voice when she reminds us to check on the recipients of the service. So we know that we all intend to build a sense of connection and belonging in our schools, but when we ask students how they feel, we can see in our data that not all students are feeling that connection. So in order to increase connection and belonging, we have to continue to focus on culturally responsive pedagogy, where student voice and experience is acknowledged, valued, and encouraged. Continue to focus on classrooms that are inclusive and learning is relevant and accessible for all learners. We've identified a variety of strategies that will continue to support that work, looking at the focus of connecting assessment, planning, and programming, expanding our school-based team series that we began last year at secondary to elementary and middle, really recognizing that school-based team can be the hub or the heart of a school, and implementation of the district children and youth care standard of practice, which includes a holistic success in school plan. When we look at the future orientation, we're really excited about the work that our district does to support transition for students with complex needs. But an additional step that we want to take is to look at including more person-centered planning, which is a holistic planning process to help people with diverse abilities plan for the future. And we trained secondary folks in this 2 years ago, and we have some of this work happening, but the hope is to extend it. And that work looks at bringing family, friends, community partners, etc., to a meeting and really celebrating an individual's strengths, passions, dreams, and then mapping out a plan for the future. And a visual is created, and then that representation is used to support and guide programming and supports in school. So again, we have some of that happening, but the goal is to extend that further. We'll be reviewing current programming for diverse learners this year and look at patterns and opportunities. Our Pathways and Partnership team continue to work alongside other departments, and the team continues to provide exceptional learning experiences and opportunities for students. The connections to post-secondary and other community partnerships enhance transitional opportunities for our students. So it was really difficult to kind of pull in just some key pieces for this part of the report. But when we consider the strategies in the strategic plan for Goal 1, we feel confident that the focus identified in this report, in addition to the other opportunities that we know are happening in our district and in our schools, will continue to move forward in increasing an inclusive and culturally responsive learning environment that will support and improve all learners' personal and academic success. Thank you. And I don't know, Deb, if we're doing questions now or at the end.
Probably
turn
no.
it over. Oh,
Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry, Trustee Ferris.
Yeah. Are there any questions? I mean, it's quite a document, and obviously there's a lot more work behind this than what we see. And I really appreciate it. It's a very interesting, it's a really interesting and positive development on the part of the province, I think.
Thank you. Happy to turn it over to, I think, Colin next.
Great.
So I'll speak very briefly to Goal 2 and to the report in general. You will have seen reference. Oh. I'll see if that reduces the feedback. Okay. You will have seen a reference in the FESL report to an appendix. The appendix is a standard report that gives data and evidence that will be common across all 60 districts within the province, and provides the reader or the viewer with some demographic information and indicators of success. And with respect to Goal 2, the very important part of that appendix is that it does disaggregate the data, so it will provide data on Indigenous learners and their success. And it will also break that information down further to those students who live on reserve and those who live in the urban community. In addition, you'll see embedded within not just the Goal 2 portion of the report, but other elements, some other data sets which are specific and local to SD61, which we also feel provides greater information and supplements the data that we can provide. So At that point, I'll hand it over to Dr. Nemi and ask her to tell you more about the information under Goal 2.
Excellent. Thank you, Colin. I'm just going to look for a checkpoint to make sure everybody can hear me okay. We're good? Okay, thank you. I just want to acknowledge everybody in the circle today, because when we talk about data and we talk about, you know, reports, really we're talking about story, and we're talking about children and families and lives. And so as we navigate through this, we're looking at how do we make improvements across an education system, and what is our work collectively to do that here. And so when we look at goal two for us and the work that we're doing is to critically examine the work that the board put forward in the coordination of when we started to look at the strategic plan, right? And how does that impact Indigenous student learners and families across SD61? And what is our story and what's our narrative? And what do we need to be doing collectively together to improve that? So goal 2 really does focus on that. Goal 2 of the Greater Victoria School District strategic plan is to create a culturally responsive learning environment that will support Indigenous learners' personal and academic success. And as we start to talk about culturally responsive practice, one of the things that we've been trying to embody as a school district is, what does that look like? What does it feel like? What do we need to know about that? And again, you'll hear continuously from all areas of across this system is that the umbilical cord is that cultural safety is the outcome, right, of becoming culturally responsive as a system. And in order to do that, we need to begin, you know, along that continuum of developing our awareness. And what does that look like and feel like from the recipients of our service as we apply that outward? So we have some strategies that we're looking at within the school, right? We look at number 1, what does it critically examine personal and systemic biases? This is one that we are undertaking as a system. This is one where we're going to be needing to weave a lot of looking at our blind spots and our dark spots sometimes, right, as a system, and as we start to uncover that. And, you know, one of the areas that we're leaning into is the equity scan through the ministry to be able to help us with that work and bring and call in all areas of our system to be able to help us identify that, participate in those conversations, and really lean into the truth telling, right? So as we lean into truth telling and uncovering our story, that's what allows us to help move forward and understand some things that we need to know. We're looking at supporting Indigenous student identity through collaboration with Indigenous community. And it's important to talk about authenticity, right? And calling in authentic voice. And what does that look like and feel like? And so when we look at our 4 houses, or we look at our partners, or we look at our parents, it's about ensuring that the recipient of the service feels seen and heard. Right? So it's not about us identifying that we feel seen and heard as an education system, but it's about, do the recipients and their children, you know, that we're serving, do they feel seen and heard by the way that we're collaborating with them? So it's about having those conversations and flipping some of our processes and structures that we're currently doing and starting to co-design and co-develop that back together. And then we need to look at, you know, this one, which is address the academic inequity of outcomes for Indigenous learners. And again, I'm going to go back to local story, right? And so what do we need to know about our narrative and our story is that we know that Indigenous students in Greater Victoria School District, there's not parity between Indigenous learners and non-Indigenous learners in Greater Victoria School District. So as a collective family, we have work to do. Right. And so what does that work need to look like and feel like, and who's involved with that? And how do we start to uncover some of those pathways forward? And so one of the things that you heard Tammy talk a little bit about is Indigenous pedagogy, right? So the curriculum change to be able to include and embody Indigenous worldviews and perspectives. But how are we supporting the system to uncover those truths and what needs to come in? And how do we do that in a way that is responsive, that's respectful, that's relevant, that's meaningful, and that we're doing it as a collective as SD61. Right. And so you're going to see that we're going to lean into areas to be able to look at, you know, why our children aren't coming to school, right? Why are there attendance gaps, right? What does that look like? And again, that goes back to why we're trying to embody what it means to be a culturally responsive education system, right? And that's going to be us holding up our mirror to ourselves to be able to ask those questions and to be able to uncover some of those pieces that we need to start tying together. The board, and I really do want to recognize the trustees for their work within the budget as we went through this year, because you did allocate some funding to go towards anti-racism and some training to be able to uncover some of these pieces that we need to learn together as a system, and that our collective work is going to be going in that direction. And I know that we did start our first session in August, that we did spend an entire day there, and we started to unpack some of the foundation that we needed to lay. And that's not, and I guess I'm going to use this word, it can't be performative, right? So as education systems, we cannot be performative, meaning that this isn't just a one-time training, or that this is a one-time piece, but this is something that we need to embody, that we need to be able to continue to move through, and that we need those critical friends to support us as we're starting to learn some of these pieces or unpack that. Because when we start to examine biases and we start to examine, topics as it relates to racism or privilege or power sharing, it all relates to how we're going to impact the end result for the recipients of the service, which is really our students. As we move forward and we start to look a little bit, I really want to hold up the work that's been done, and I want to recognize, Colin and the senior staff and our local nations, because we've been doing a ton of work as it relates to breathing life into our local education agreements, and what does that look like? And so we've renewed our local education agreement with our Songhees Nation. We're going to be going through the very first signing of the Esquimalt local education agreement, and then the work comes to be able to train the system as it relates to what does it mean to have a local education agreement with our local First Nations, and what's our responsibility and shared responsibility in the work that we have to support their children. One of the things, and I think just to close off as I hand it off to Harold, is that as we start to anchor and root ourselves in Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and looking at how we do this work, it all anchors in the foundation of relationships, right? And the relationships that we have with each other, the relationships for those that we serve, and the relationships that we want our children to experience as they come through our system. And so I think that I'm going to end with story. And the fact is that, when we look at reports and we look at data and we embody this work, it's about story. These are our children, these are our families, and we have a responsibility to uphold this and uphold the integrity to ensure that everybody is leaving our system in a way that they feel seen and heard, and that's reflective of what we choose to put forward. So I want to thank you for your time. I'm going to hold any space for questions, and I do look forward to us actually living this work, right? And so that's going to be the critical piece. This isn't a document that sits on a shelf for the ministry or for us. This is for us to breathe life into it and to ensure that it's doing the right outcomes for the children that we all serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley.
Everybody, I guess I'm up. I'm Harold, and I have the pleasure of working with Pam Helverson on Goal 3. And one of the big pieces to this goal is the fact that we have taken the strategies right out of the strategic plan and paraphrased them for our work here in goal number 3. I also want to point out that this goal, we've been working towards a framework for a number of years within our district. And we started in our elementary schools way back in the day, about 3 years ago, when we recognized the need to improve counseling supports within our school. And so over time, what we've been doing is we've been building on that framework so we get a much bigger framework that we can work with within our district. Excuse me. The first time talking to people in a long time. This is hard. So looking at that framework, we've established the elementary, we moved up to middle, and now we're focused on secondary. But what we don't want to build anything on this framework that's not sustainable. So we're being very, very mindful of the work that we are doing and how we can really stabilize the district in that physical and mental health literacy component by focusing until we get to that place where we feel that we are seeing the data, and the data is showing that we have improvements within our district. And as you read through this document, and Pam will talk about it a little bit more, you'll see a number of data points that we're looking at. And these data points are helping us to guide our work in terms of what we have to do explicitly to support physical and mental well-being within our district. Also, within these 4 strategies, that the piece about engaging and working with our families, we know that we have data that shows us where those vulnerabilities are within our district, whether that's access to mental health supports or whether that is access to physical supports. But we have data, particularly the EDI, and you'll see that in here as well, that shows us where we can actually attend to having more focused conversations and reach out to family in those areas. I'm going to turn it over to Pam, and she'll get into a little bit more detail about that. There you go, Pam.
Thanks, Harold. Can everybody hear me? Okay. I'm on a different laptop. I'm a little freaked out by the whole thing, so just bear with me if something terrible happens here. Anyway, thanks for that great introduction. And I really wanted to lean into something that Shelley says. So data really does help to tell the story. And I think that's exactly what we've tried to do in this document. And we have a lot of great data in our district, and some of it we've referred to in the document. There are many other data points that we don't have in here as we tried to put it into a cohesive document. But you'll see as I talk a little bit about 3 main areas. I'm going to chat just briefly about professional development to support Goal 3, a bit about the work we're doing to support our children, youth, and care, and then really a little bit about how we're removing barriers and really working to support those vulnerable kiddos and their families that Harold just mentioned. So when we look at professional learning and we talk about how do we best support the physical and mental well-being of all of our students, we've used data such as the Middle Years Development Inventory, the EDI, the Early Years Development Inventory, and then our Student Learning Survey, as well as the Adolescent Health Survey, to really help paint that picture of how are our students doing and what are the things that we need to continue to focus on. And so, as Harold said, building out that framework that's going to help to really implement both informal and formal ways of supporting mental health and well-being. And informal would be those everyday teaching opportunities that we know teachers are constantly doing. What is the culture in the building? How are we talking to kids? How do we find those teachable moments to say, this is a good time to talk about this because it's just popped up, as well as how do we use the more formal kinds of programs that we've introduced. So Second Step is one of those tools we've introduced in our elementary schools. And then PICE as well is something that we are leaning into, support from the Pacific Institute for Sport Excellence, primarily in the middle school years. And as we go further on into middle school, we're going to continue to focus on some of the mental health literacy programs that we can bring into those schools. So we know, again, the data is really clear. It's in the document. When we ask students questions about, do you feel people care about you? Do you know about how to take care of yourself? The answers tell us that we've got work to do. And so that's where we continue to, again, how do we implement some of these resources? Our goal is to really have students at each grade level, when they're asked, do you know how to care for your mental health? We really want to see some increases in the numbers that we're seeing in some of our data points. So that's something we're really going to be, again, focused on those formal and informal, explicit, and the other kinds of ways we can really be teaching kids about that. For secondary students, or grades 8 to 12, we continue to implement a framework that's really going to support universal well-being. It's going to promote well-being and prevention and intervention. And we started this work a couple of years ago by introducing and we're using resources from teen mental health in our middle schools. We then moved that up into our secondary schools last year, and we're going to continue that as we go forward over the next few years. And one of the things that we know that really clearly is, and again, the data is in the document, that when students are asked, do you know who to go to in your school for help? Do you feel you have people you can reach out to? We're seeing an increase in those numbers, and that's great. We want kids to know that they belong and they're connected and those people are there to support them. We also know that we need to keep providing staff with the tools and the resources so that they feel they're able to do that work. And so hence, working again to continue to implement the work around teen mental health, mindfulness for educators, trauma-informed practices, ease is another everyday anxiety strategies for educators. There are many resources that we want to continue to support and promote to be used by our staff in our schools. One of the most important things of the research coming out of how we support mental health of children is we support the mental health of the adults. And we know that when we all develop those skills, we're more able to support the students that we're working with. Our youth in care, we know we need to pay very close attention to the stories of our children and youth in care. We need to understand their lives. We need to really dig deep, and we've really been working hard on that as a district. What do we know about these kiddos? What does the data tell us as well? And so again, to go back to the data, we know it's a strategy named in our strategic plan, as it should be, because I think this is a population of kids, again, we need to pay close attention to. We also know the benefit of supporting these students when we come together as a team and we collaborate. So with that in mind, as a district team, we've been working very closely with other ministries, with other community partners, with delegated agencies to say, how can we support these kids? What do we know? What are the questions we still have? And that work certainly continues. Last year, I guess, we implemented a standard of practice to really support the work around our children, youth in care. Part of that was we hired on a district youth and family counselor to really take on that role, to be overseeing that work. We've also changed the way that we're tracking some of the data. And we've implemented the idea of how do we develop a supporting success in school plan, which is a holistic look at the child. And our intention here is that plan is really developed by the school team in collaboration with social workers. And this is a really key piece for us to really engage social workers in that work at the school. And so again, as we go forward, that will be something we will continue to be focused on through the year. And then lastly, reducing barriers. And Harold mentioned this earlier. Our EDI data tells us that we have regions of vulnerability in our district. And that causes us to be curious and ask questions. What's happening there, or what isn't happening there, or what more could be happening there? And how do we really to support that? And so how do we use that data to ask questions and then look for opportunities to build, and to build with families, to build with community partners, to make those connections, and to say, how do we continue to work together to support all of our students? With that in mind, this past year, we were able to hire 2 district outreach transition support workers, 2 social workers who have come into our district. They started with this in February, and they worked through the summer, a good part of the summer, reaching out and connecting families to community services, and then hopefully connecting those students back to school. We had great successes over the summer with families and students that we were concerned about, and we were worried. We didn't want to lose them through the summer. And those folks kept working over the summer and made that happen. So we look forward to continuing that work and looking for other opportunities to reduce those barriers that may exist. That's it for me. Are there any questions?
There is one in the chat. And Colin, I believe you were going to address the one question that we had.
Yes, I can do that. The question says, what is SD61 doing to ensure there is Indigenous representation amongst the teaching and administrative staff? I wonder if Indigenous children would have a greater sense of belonging if they saw men and women like their adults in their family making decisions and leading them. And I think that's probably a widely held belief between many people within the system. And the GVTA, the Teachers Association, and ourselves have had equity agreements for a good number of years now. We negotiated an expanding or improved agreement back in 2017. And I think in this past summer, we probably had one of our most successful years. We have 5 teachers of Indigenous ancestry were able to be placed in 1.0 continuing contract jobs. I believe that number may now have dropped down to 4, because I could be wrong about the details, but I understand that one of the individuals may have taken a leave to pursue postgraduate education, but we certainly do draw upon that agreement that we have with the GVTA to try and bring more Indigenous teachers into the system. Perhaps a little more difficult where administrative positions are concerned, because obviously those individuals need to want to apply for those positions. And I think very, very many of the people that come into the educational system, they're wanting to work with children and their teachers foremost. And so as much as we would like and encourage those individuals to look for administrative positions, it's not necessarily everybody's career path. But we do have those arrangements in place. So we're certainly hoping that we can maintain and extend those into the future. And we appreciate our partners' involvement in collaborating with us on those projects.
Deb, can I just add a little to that too? Just to Corey. So I appreciate you asking the question, Corey, right? Because I think that the agreement that Colin is talking about is really critical. And I think as we continue to explore across the system improvements, not just within teaching and administration, but across all areas of a system, right? And what that looks like for children to see themselves reflected within the system that's serving them. And so I think that and I think this is why reports like this and the storytelling is so important, because in order for us to be able to transition our children into those opportunities as they choose their pathways forward, we need to be able to successfully move them along grade to grade so they can have those opportunities. And that's when we talk about closing the gap and looking at, parity and completion rates and all those pieces, so we can provide those opportunities for them in the future. And so I think it's critical that you ask the question, because I think it's critical that we continue to see that as a system of improvement. And so I just want to thank you for that. Thanks.
Trustee Whitaker.
Thank you. My question is either for Pam or Harold, I think. I'm really excited about hearing about the Supporting Success in School plan. And because, I just think these plans can be so key for all of our students, but I'm glad we're focusing here. But I'm wondering where this is going to be these plans are going to be created with the school and with the social workers. Are we, depending on the age, of course, are we going to include the students? And will we keep the caregivers of these students informed of what are on those plans? We will, because I have heard many a horror story where a child is in care and the foster parent has no idea of these plans. So that's my concern. Thank you.
Yeah, we will be.
And if I could we worked hard last year building those relationships with MCFD and Surrounded by Cedars and really reaching out to bring them to the table to focus on what are the needs of the district to support children in care, including their school plan, which is part of the care plan. And there's always been the separation between those. So now we've brought everyone to the table, and we're consistently meeting to work through what is our level of practice with these children. And they have to be the focus of the work based on what we know. So yeah, it's been a lot of work, but it's very good work. And we know that we're going to be able to change the lives of these students within our district moving forward with that collective and collaborative approach with everyone involved.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really excited about these plans, and I look forward to hearing the results and the measurements later with this data. So thank you very much for that.
Are there any further questions? Trustee Waters.
Thank you. Yeah, so amazing to see all of that information collected into one place. So I'm just curious about what the plan is for, is this an annual process or, and then I see this as a draft, so I'm wondering when does it become formalized and what is the process for that? Sorry if I just don't know.
So through the chair, thank you, Trustee Waters. Yes, an annual plan, continuous improvement. What we are looking for is, it is draft. Well, we're looking for help to take it from 15 pages to 10, which is not an easy feat. But also just with, if there's something really glaring that we've missed or requires tweaking, and then it will come to the board in September, and then it will go to the ministry at the September 30th, prior to the 30th deadline.
And then next year, next September, will we be revisiting progress?
Yes,
Throughout
the year with ed policy, we will have members of district team and others come forward. So we won't leave this for a year and come back to it a year later. Our hope is that we address this in every month of our meetings, because we recognize the content that is in this plan is only the surface of the work that we're doing across the district. So we want to make sure that we're not only keeping it alive and breathing life into it, as has been mentioned, but also that we're reflecting on it as we move through the year. So we're looking at points that we can say, how are we doing? If we're not achieving what we had hoped to do, what can we tweak? So it is that ongoing cyclical process, and really hopefully responsive to the information we have coming.
Then I just wanted to ask about whether if there's any aspects of this or areas in particular where you think we're going to be especially challenged to make the progress that we want. Like there's lots of strategies and goals, but I wonder just if there's anything in particular you think the board should be paying attention to in terms of the areas where we're going to have to, push the hardest.
Oh, it's a fantastic question. I would open that up to the team to see if they have thoughts on that, not to pass it along, but I do think more voices in this is important. So Tammy, Pam, Shelley, ideas?
I think one of the things we know will be more challenging, the connection and belonging coming out of COVID. So really focusing on reconnection and that sense of belonging for staff and students. So we had indicated we'd hope to see an increase on the next MDI as our indicator and student learning survey. I'm not sure if that's ambitious. We're hoping with the focus that we will see it, but that's one area. And then again, with FSA as an indicator, again, always tricky because it's right away in the fall. And so we've just did the FSA not that long ago in the spring, and with the fall date, that might be tricky to, because I don't know if we're going to be measuring correctly when we look at what's there. So those are the only two that I'm cautious about, but hopeful.
Ellie or Pam?
I would just echo what Tammy has said. I believe that we've seen great numbers of kids return to school this fall, which is very exciting. So I'm optimistic that we're going to see the increases that we're hoping for in terms of how their mental wellness and the well-being and the health of students. But we are coming through and continue to come through a pandemic. So it might be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think as long as we stay focused on implementing the resources and the programs and the supports, and as Tammy said, that really strong focus on connection and belonging, and doing what we can to support families who maybe aren't as connected as we would like them to be, I think we will see the growth that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm. And I think I'll just follow up with both what Tammy and Pam said. Like, I think there's a couple of things. Like, I think we are working really closely as a district team across the system. So we're interfacing regularly every week to be able to see what pockets we're hearing. And so I think that's really important. I think what I am witnessing from an Indigenous education lens is our families are returning, right? And we're seeing that. And I think the biggest piece is that, like Tammy had said, connection and belonging is that how are we receiving our families back after COVID? And what does that look like as we're focusing in on the relationship and the relation that we have with each other and with our families, right? As we build that sense of belonging and sense of community back in the school. And so we're not looking at it as a deficit, but we're looking at it as an embrace of a celebration coming back. And so I think we're all trying to be very aware and supportive of that for our staff and for our school communities and for our parents. And I think people are very open to reaching out and having those conversations with us. And then we're trying to meet really, I think, responsively as a district team right now to be able to pivot on the things that are coming up. And then we're each meeting with our communities that we're all serving. And so, you know, I know the work that Pam's doing as it relates to children and youth in care, right? And I know the work that, you know, Tammy's doing as it relates to, you know, when we're looking at, you know, connection and belonging and resources, and the way that we're meeting with Indigenous community and the communities that we serve. So I think that, you know, with it just being 1 week kind of with school restarting, I think the biggest piece that I'm seeing from our piece is that I'm seeing the breath of hope and excitement, and our kids are back in buildings, and our staff are happy, and there's joy. And so I think now we just have to be very aware about focusing in on keeping that connection and celebration of that, and supporting our adults. So then that way we can have that wraparound continue and move along. So I feel like that's, you know, the real truth of it. And I think everybody's paddling really hard to keep that momentum going. So thank you.
Trustee Whitaker, you had one more question?
Actually, I'm good. I'm going to defer. I think Angela also had a question.
Okay.
Thank you, Trustee Whitaker. It was more of a comment. I mean, what I've heard here tonight is really positive, and it makes me really hopeful for the future. But I think one of the things, excuse me, that we need to keep in mind is that some caregivers and families don't have any trust whatsoever in the school board. They don't have any trust whatsoever in the Ministry of any ministry. We'll put it that way. And so what we need to do in order to get those caregivers to trust us again is to not only listen, but to come through with our promises. And that is something that I've been hearing from a lot of parents and caregivers in the district over the summer, is that they don't feel that there's trust. And that is something that we're all going to have to work together to build up, because reading through this document, it really does give me hope for the future of this district here. So just keep in mind that we need to be constantly listening, and you know, rebuilding that trust, because we can't go any further unless we have trust.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, Superintendent Whitten, do you want to move on to C5?
Sure can. It is the aggregate report. So we are required to report in aggregate form at the end of every year, the beginning of every year, the previous year's number of incidents, anaphylactic incidents. So as the memo states, we had one during the 2020-2021 school year. So that's reported in as we have to and need to with the anaphylaxis protection order.
All right, well, thank you very much. We have no notice of motion or general announcements that I know of. So this was very good, wonderful information, and I want to thank all of our staff who came out and supported the report, the ESL report. And if I could have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor? Thank you, everybody.